Well, I'll tell you the truth, I had trouble with my wife before we got married, you know. We went together for 6 months, then she gave me the air, told me it was all over. I said to her, what's the matter? Is there somebody else? She looked at me. She said, there must be. I'll tell you what, my wife, I never got no respect at all, you know. We were going steady. She told me don't talk about sex until we get married. We got married. She told me now you can talk about it all you want. I'm married 20 years. All I get is smart answers and bad cooking. And my wife's cooking, forget about her cooking. But the other night I left over a hamburger. She used it to scrub the sink. Well, you had to come and get it. My house is try and eat it. The trouble with me is I'm too easygoing, you know. Like this afternoon, I had a bite to eat in a restaurant. I got busy. I had to share a table with someone. He sat down, an old man. Must have been in his 80s. I mean, this guy was old. I asked him to pass me the salt and pepper. He had to make 2 trips.
Good morning. It's Thursday, Delta Force Thursday, March the 14th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have the patriotic shorts, the motivation, Bishop Barron, Ayn Rand, the 33 strategies of war, and Inside Delta Force. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. Now a little bit of combat chatter.
Two individuals in there digging around on the ground. It looks like he appears to be covering something up in the road. He's on the east side of the road. Gotcha. And 1510, there's a child just outside of that tent. The individual wearing white is underneath that cover. Roger, if you identify a motorcycle with a barrel on the back of it or a barrel near it, that's the other individual that used the branch to cover whatever he was covering there. Roger, my only concern is that child right now. Once he gets away, and if we get 429, I'm good with it. Roger, I understand the child would be a concern. I understand that. Great. Group, this entire group has been participating in diverting traffic away from that site where we saw them covering up the ID track. Do you confirm? Yeah, Roger. Absolutely. What we're really waiting on now is 429 and for the child to move. All right, those individuals are now over by where that ID is suspected. Yep. 1510, there's two individuals, one on a motorcycle, one off a motorcycle in the vicinity of where we suspected that ID. They're digging it up. Hey, can you confirm if they're digging it? They appear to be working on the road, yes. They're digging around that same area. And they've positioned themselves on the opposite side of the motorcycle from the friendlies that suffered the ID attack, and they're definitely digging in the road. Is that a kid? Damn it! And the kid appears to be carrying something over into the vicinity. He's handing them something, and they're digging in that road. Okay, go away, kid. Go away, kid. Go away, kid. Roger. All right, we're at 2700. Yep. And individuals moving with a wheelbarrow up to that same area. Got that guy at the wheelbarrow stop. Hey, Barron, he looks like he went down to get water. He's continuing back down to get more water or something. The child brought something to those two individuals that appear to be digging in the road, handed it to him, and moved off at this point. Big break, 1015. Are you confident that you have PID on these individuals? We see the two digging and with the wheelbarrow in the center. Roger, I believe that a hostile act that is in the same areas that we saw them cover something up. Roger, can you accept Roger, good copy. They're happy for us. Oh! Never mind. Break, it just detonated by itself. Alpha wind 180. They just blew themselves up. They just blew themselves up.
And that was combat chatter. It was apparently some people laying an IED in the road, and when they're being observed, and apparently blew themselves up. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the patriotic shorts.
I heard an old hollow thump, 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 and I said, oh, that don't sound good. That sounds like 60-millimeter mortar. And I said, there are 12 mortars in the air. I bet they've got this hill zeroed. I didn't want any shrapnel in my face. I didn't want it messed up with shrapnel. So I see this big tree, and so I go face first, body first into the tree. If I'm going to get shrapnel, I'm going to get it in the back. So I started counting the impacts, counted 12. And I'm thinking, I didn't feel the sting, so, if I've got shrapnel, it's not much. I can smell the burned eggs. And if you're close enough to a mortar round to smell the burnt egg, it's in your hip pocket. So I knew it was very, very close. So I said, I'm going to get up and walk over and talk to Battalion Commander Lieutenant Green about being in my foxhole. I walked over, and one of the 12 rounds had gone in that foxhole. Hit Lieutenant Green in the chest.
Why do giant modern warships have tiny guns? This is one of the biggest warships in the U.S. Navy, but this here is its biggest gun. It's only 127 millimeters, and this is Russia's Kirov-class battlecruiser, their largest warship still active today with its largest gun, the AK-130. But the reason they are so small isn't what most people think. To put things into perspective, this is the largest weapon in history, the Heavy Gustav, an 80-centimeter cannon. And today, this small truck can do the same kind of damage with its missile. The gigantic weapons on battleships have been replaced by rockets and cruise missiles. Guns are not as effective against large targets as missile systems are. However, it is different for small and medium targets. Normal cannons are much less expensive per shot, have higher firing rates, and hold more ammunition. Also, not every target requires a Tomahawk's level of destruction. A 127-millimeter gun should be enough to destroy a small threat that could reach the ship, like a small boat.
It was scary and chaotic. It was traumatic when you're in the heat of battle and anti-aircraft fires coming up from the ground to knock you out of the sky. These enemy fighters are coming in and attacking you from all angles. All hell's breaking loose. It's scary. It's just riveting. But you're flying in close formation at high altitude, freezing to death because we were unpressurized. At our high altitude, at 50 to 60 degrees below zero, if you take your gloves off, your fingers can self-amputate to the nearest knuckle. And you don't see any blood, you don't feel any pain, you're not even aware. You just see your fingers lying on the floor.
They gave you the Congressional Medal of Honor.
Now that's Lieutenant Diane.
As a guy who was playing a double amputee Vietnam veteran, it introduced me to countless combat veterans. Lieutenant Dan continues to this day to play a part in this ongoing mission. Thought I'd try out my sea legs.
Well, you ain't got no legs, Lieutenant Dan.
Yes, I know that. Back in the late 70s, early 80s, there were a bunch of Vietnam movies that were made, if you recall. Coming Home and Casualties of War, and Platoon is one of them, Apocalypse Now, Deer Hunter. You just always felt, I'm just not sure that Vietnam veteran is going to be okay at the end of the movie. But then there was also the other side of the story where veterans could come home, process their war experience, and move on from it and be successful in life. But we hadn't seen that story until Forrest Gump came along.
It was the pre-dawn hours on the Anzio beaches, and because he stood 6'7" tall, the young Army private was ordered first off his landing craft to help determine the water depth for the other men of the 3rd Infantry Division. His name was James Ornis, and shortly after making it ashore, he was riddled with German machine gun fire, his right leg nearly blown off. Ornis would spend the next 18 months learning how to walk again. Upon returning stateside, his younger brother Peter Graves, also a World War II vet, convinced him to go to Hollywood and give acting a try. Now known as James Arness, he scored bit parts until landing the role of Marshal Matt Dillon on the TV show Gunsmoke, thanks to some help from his good friend John Wayne. Gunsmoke would enjoy an amazing 20-year run in primetime thanks to Arness's earnest portrayal of the forthright lawman. Jimmy never spoke of his war heroism and never complained of the constant pain, said Graves. All he ever said was that it was an honor to serve his country.
Saudi Arabia kicked out an American delegation on religious freedom. So the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom was on an official visit to a UNESCO heritage site, when all of a sudden Saudi officials told the chairman of the U.S.-mandated committee that he needed to remove his kippah. And the chairman was Rabbi Abraham Cooper. And so U.S. Embassy staff that was with the delegation tried to relay the rabbi's polite but resolute refusal, and the rabbi himself telling them he didn't seek confrontation or provocation. He just couldn't comply with the request as a Jew. And that's when the site officials escorted the delegation out. And so this has created a diplomatic crisis for Saudi Arabia. And they rushed to apologize to the commission, but the group decided unanimously to cut the trip short and head back to America, with Cooper saying it's a pretty stunning request considering we're there as a vanguard for international religious freedom and we're preparing a report on Saudi Arabia. And adding, it's like asking somebody in Saudi Arabia to remove her hijab. I didn't take off my kippah 50 years ago in the Soviet Union. I'm surely not taking off my kippah for you. With the State Department also calling Saudi to complain about the treatment of the commission. And we're seeing Saudi Arabia continue to apologize and inviting the commission back and saying that it was based on a misunderstanding.
What happens if a fighter jet tries to land on a highway? Imagine a fighter pilot is in the middle of a conflict and is suddenly forced to make an emergency landing. Maybe he's been shot. Maybe his aircraft has suffered a malfunction. Either way, he scans the ground below him and sees a highway running directly beneath him. Could the pilot land? That depends on several factors. First, has the road been built to withstand the 30,000 or more pounds that will be slamming down onto it? Second, is it free from obstructions such as power lines that could pose a threat to the pilot? Those two requirements eliminate many of today's highways, but highway landings are indeed possible and have been performed many times. In Sweden, the Air Force practices landing its vegans on roadways as part of its dispersed airbasing system. In the UK, Jaguars train on specially built strips of highway, while during the Cold War, Harriers took off from the German Autobahn. That means, while not always ideal, under the right conditions, a road can become a life-saving landing strip for a pilot.
I was born in 1960s behind Iron Curtain in communist Poland. And this is the time that we all know how dangerous these communist systems were in Eastern Europe. So political prisoners, political murders, assassinations, censorship, that was norm. The fraudulent elections, that was norm. Intimidation by the state, intimidation of political opponents, intimidation of their families and their friends. And yes, I encountered that too. And eventually I was forced to leave Poland in 1980s after spending time in communist prison as a political prisoner.
And that was the Patriotic Shorts. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now some motivation.
If my mom had been the mother I wanted her to be, I'd probably not be the man I'm proud to be. I think the ability to manage your own mind and emotions is probably one of the single most important, and maybe the second is the ability to influence others, because that's what makes you a leader. And hopefully you're doing that for a higher good, because there are all kinds of leaders, as you know. But I don't think most people are very good at emotional fitness. Most people are just not as happy as they could be. You know, I did one book, Money Master the Game. It's kind of like this.
Yes.
Only, and what I did in that case is I interviewed, 50 of the smartest financial people in the world.
Yes.
Ray Dalio, Carl Icahn, Warren Buffett. And out of 50 of them, and again, it's in my judgment, I could be completely wrong. And I've spent a lot of time with them. Some have become really good friends. There's probably 4 or 5 that are really happy people. You go, oh, well, money makes people unhappy. Money, it has nothing to do with money. Money makes you more of what you are. It just magnifies. If you're mean, you have more to be mean with. If you're kind, you have more to give, But I think that most people are they haven't learned to manage what's going inside. It doesn't matter how much abundance they have. They're still unhappy. We've all seen people great comedians that have killed themselves. Anthony Bourdain, beautiful man, traveled the world, killed himself, fashion designers that have done it. We've all seen all these different people, Kate Spade. And it's like, what? They had everything, except they didn't master what's going on here and here. And this is why you lived your life the way you have as well. So I think that skill set is the most important one. That's why even in the book, my last 2 chapters, I think are the most important, because it's really about the power of the mind. Because everybody knows about placebos, right? They were only discovered in World War II, and it was discovered by accident. This doctor ran out of morphine, and he's treating these people that are badly injured. And, you need the morphine not just so they're out of pain, but so they don't go into shock. And the actual person who discovered this gets no credit was the nurse, because the nurse handed him a syringe and said, we've got some more morphine. So he believed it, and he said, you'll be out of pain in just less than a minute. Wow. He injected them, and in every case, none of them went into shock. 90% of them were out of pain, and they used nothing. It was saline, right? So after World War II, he went back to Harvard, and he was the person that created what we now consider to be the double-blind studies, which are always compared to a placebo, right? And what most people don't know is the bigger the placebo intervention, the more powerful the mind believes in it. So what I try to do is show people, even in this book, here are the things that you can do to take control of your mind, because if you take care of your body and then you don't take care of your mind and emotions, you're going to be miserable. Unless you can push through discomfort, most things that are going to give you the greatest reward require discomfort initially.
Yeah.
Right? And the discomfort, it's like, my original teacher, Jim Rohn, used to always say, there's 2 pains in life, the pain of discipline or the pain of regret. He goes, discipline weighs ounces, regret weighs tons. And so I've trained myself to do that. Then I meditate. Then I always make an acknowledgement call briefly, or leave a voicemail for someone just to spark the day. And then the first thing I do is always whatever is the most difficult.
Yes.
Because then you have momentum for your day. And when you train your brain to do what's difficult first, then emotional fitness just comes naturally. And more importantly, so does achievement, so does your ability to contribute to other people. Because I have 105 companies now, to give you an idea. I manage 13 of them directly, ongoingly. And, there are all kinds of different industries, from AI to, my resorts in Fiji to sports teams I own. And I mean, it's insane, the dichotomy of them. We're doing $7 billion in business, so I got to do that while I'm being a good dad to 5 kids and 5 grandkids, while I'm taking care of my body, while I'm living my normal mission. So if I don't take care of my body and my energy and my mind, I mean, you'd be overwhelmed by all the demands because, listen, all I got to do is pick up my phone and you're going to have all kinds of, oh, that's cool, oh, shit, that's it. But, you know, what are the chances with thousands of employees on 3-4 different continents now that somebody's messing up? If messing up is not what I think they should be doing, it's 100%. So I'd always be in reaction until I trained my brain to say, no, you know, problems are a sign of life and all they are challenges to be solved. And what makes you a great leader is your ability to solve problems or teach teams to build a culture where they can solve problems. And so it gives me this tremendous creativity and flexibility, but I've got the base of energy to make it work. Dealing with the loss of someone you care about is probably the most difficult thing of all. I would say maybe as a child, seeing the level of frustration between my parents, you know, I had 4 different fathers, and watching them kind of, you know, accept whatever life gave them. It's why a lot of my drive came about, is seeing my fathers be berated by my mother, who I love dearly, and just watching them break down. Like, you know, probably the single most painful event of my life, but also shaped me in such a beautiful way, was when I was 11 years old. We had no money for food, and it was Thanksgiving, which in America is a big holiday feast. Mm-hmm. And so we'd been without food before. We'd have crackers and butter, and, you know, we survived. But we weren't going to have a Thanksgiving feast. And there's a knock at the door, and I go to the door, and there's this giant guy there with groceries in each hand. He had a pot beside him on the ground with an uncooked turkey. And I said, who are you here for? He goes, I'd like to speak to your father. And my mom and dad were yelling at each other, saying things that you can never take back. And I'm trying to make sure my younger brother and sister, they're 5 and 7 years younger, wouldn't hear any of this. And that day changed my life because I thought it was going to be the most exciting day. Dad, go to the front. What is it? I said, it's for you. You answered. No, it's for you. I remember I opened the door and I was just so excited to see my father be happy. Like, we're going to have a feast. This is going to be incredible. He got angry. And he's like, we don't accept charity. He went to slam the door in the man's face. And the man's foot was there, so it bounced off his foot. He still opened the groceries. He's like, sir, I'm just a delivery guy. He said, it's not charity. Everybody has a tough time. Someone bought this and they're sending it to you as a gift. My father said, we don't take charity. He goes to close the door again. This time the guy's shoulder was there also, so it bounced off again. And then I was standing right there, and there's this moment I'll never forget where this man looked at my father, and he looked at me and he said, sir, don't let your ego make your family suffer. And the veins on my dad's face, on the side of his neck, I'll never forget, they bulged, like his face turned red. I thought I was going to punch him in the face. And then there's this moment, my dad's shoulders dropped. He took the groceries, slammed the door, didn't say thank you, and stormed off. And I just remember thinking, like, how come he's not happy? You know, you talk about pain. It's like, I love my father so much. And there's basically 3 decisions that I think everybody makes in their life, that whether they're aware of it or not, moment to moment. I figured this out afterwards because I was so obsessed with what's wrong, because he eventually left our family. And that was the most painful thing I ever had. So it's like feeling like I failed. You know, I blame myself. Like, why couldn't I get through to my father? You know, I was 11 years old. But later on, it helped me understand the 3 decisions are, first, you got to decide what to focus on. Every moment of your life, there's something grabbing your focus. And you don't experience life. You experience the part of life you focus on, right? What's wrong is always available. So is what's right, right? And there are different kinds of focus. And my dad's focus that day was really on what he hadn't done. And I know that because he kept muttering it. You know, he hadn't taken care of his family. There's no money for Thanksgiving. Somebody had to give us charity. And then the second decision you make about once you focus on something is, what does it mean? Is this the end or the beginning? If you think it's the end of a relationship, you're going to behave different than it's the beginning, right? My dad's meaning was that he was worthless. And so then the third decision is, what do I do? Which, whatever meaning you come up with creates the emotions, which affects what you do. And what he decided to do is leave our family. But for me, it was like, this is amazing. I mean, you know, we are having Thanksgiving. You know, this is incredible. We got food. What a concept. And then the meaning, though, is what changed my whole life, which was, wow, strangers care. That completely changed my life. That painful experience, I couldn't deny that somebody who wanted no credit delivered this food to my family. And so what I decided to do is say, someday I'm going to do this for another family. So when I was 17, I had 2 families, and it was a euphoric experience. I went in jeans and a t-shirt. I didn't go like the delivery guy, but I wanted to see the face of the people. And then next year was 4 people, and then it was 8. And my thing was doubling. And I had a little company, and then I got to 1 million people a year, and then I got to 4 million people a year. Then when I was doing Money Master the Game, I'm interviewing these billionaires, Jay, and I'm watching Congress cut food stamps. It's now called the SNAP program, by I think it was $6 billion. So every family that actually needs food, and my family was one of those back then, they all have to come up with a week's worth of food out of every month. So I was like, I called my team and I said, how many people have I fed in my lifetime? I didn't know there was 42 million meals. I was like, this is pretty cool. And I was like, what if I fed 50 million people, like my entire lifetime in 1 year? And I was like, what if I did 100 million? What if I fed 1 billion people in 10 years? So that was 7 years ago. We're at 850 million meals, right? And I'm going to hit the billion earlier than what I promised and targeted. And then I've got a sustainable approach. But I tell you that because my worst day was my best day. The most painful day, the day where I felt like I'd do the least, where I felt impotent, led me to have new understandings, new skills, new capacities, new drives, new hunger. I mean, would I really be feeding 100 million people a year, 100 million meals a year if I was well fed as a child? Probably not. And I'd love to believe I'm such a perfect person, but no, I just know what suffering feels like, so I don't want anybody else to suffer, Yeah. So I think sometimes the suffering experiences of our life, if we don't let them crush us, we let them drive us, they actually become the best day in your life. And taking your worst day and making your best day is a beautiful target for anybody.
That is just, it's magical even hearing it.
It's magical experiencing it. You see there's grace in life too. It's like, if you can, like I used to think in the early days, because my mom was beautiful. She was the most influential person in my life. And yet she also, when she drank alcohol and took, prescription medication, she got crazy. Yeah. So she smashed my head against the wall until I bled or feed me liquid soap. And I never told anybody about this when she was alive, but I had this group of young kids that I could see, a tall white guy who seems to be quite successful. What does he know? So I told him the whole story. But out of all that, it's like if my mom had been the mother I wanted her to be, I'd probably not be the man I'm proud to be.
Yes.
Like I had to grow. I had to become a practical psychologist at 11 to manage her so that my brother and sister weren't messed up. And it's like, there's grace in everything. And I always think it's like, it's our job to realize that life's happening for us, not to us. And to find how it's happening for us, that's our job. If we do that, then we have a magical life. If we don't, but if your energy's low and you're exhausted, then you don't find those empowering meanings.
Yeah.
That's why, to me, you can't separate the mind and the body. You got to feed the mind and strengthen the body on a daily basis in some way. And if you do that, life can be pretty miraculous.
And that was a little motivation. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the Daily Law for March the 14th.
March 14th. Immerse yourself in the details. When Leonardo da Vinci wanted to create a whole new style of painting, one that was more lifelike and emotional, he engaged in an obsessive study of details. He spent endless hours experimenting with forms of light hitting various geometrical solids, to test how light could alter the appearance of objects. He devoted hundreds of pages in his notebooks to exploring the various gradations of shadows in every possible combination. He gave this same attention to the folds of a gown, the patterns in hair, the various minute changes in the expression of a human face. When we look at his work, we are not consciously aware of these efforts on his part, but we feel how much more alive and realistic his paintings are, as if he had captured reality. In general, try approaching a problem or idea with a much more open mind. Let your study of the details guide your thinking and shape your theories. Think of everything in nature or in the world as a kind of hologram, the smallest part reflecting something essential about the whole. Immersing yourself in details will combat the generalizing tendencies of the brain and bring you closer to reality. Daily Law. Uncover the secret to any reality by uncovering the details. Mastery, Chapter 5. Awaken the dimensional mind, the creative active.
And that was the Daily Law for March the 14th. From The Daily Laws by Robert Greene. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Bishop Robert Barron.
Our job in the wider society is to be a leaven and a light and a direction. Modernity wants to make religion into a private matter. So it's like a hobby. It's like something I cultivate in my privacy. But that's not biblical at all. In the Bible, the purpose of being a Christian is to be a light for others, is to be leaven for others, is to be salt, which preserves what's worth preserving, salt that puts to death what should be put to death. That our lives are other-directed. We have a function precisely in the society. The irony is that we tend to think of religion as, well, that's not about politics and economics and society. It's about what you do in your privacy. No. We're a city on a hill. You don't hide the city on the hill. You make it more visible, right? So that's the role of Christians, is to be a sign of contradiction, a sign of direction. We exist precisely for the wider society.
And that was Bishop Robert Barron. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the Ayn Rand thought of the day. Quote, "The perception of reality, the learning of facts, the ability to distinguish truth from falsehood are exclusively individual capacities. The mind is an exclusively individual affair. There's no such thing as a collective brain. And intellectual integrity, the refusal to sacrifice one's mind and one's knowledge of the truth to any social pressures, is a profoundly and properly selfish attitude." Unquote. And that was the Ayn Rand thought of the day. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now we pick up where we left off with the 33 strategies of war.
By Miyamoto Musashi. You must make your opponent acknowledge defeat from the bottom of his heart. Keys to warfare. Thousands of years ago, we humans lived a nomadic life, wandering across deserts and plains, hunting and gathering. Then we shifted into living in settlements and cultivating our food. The change brought us comfort and control, but in a part of our spirit we remain nomads. We cannot help but associate the room to roam and wander with a feeling of freedom. To a cat, tight, enclosed spaces may mean comfort, but to us they conjure suffocation. Over the centuries, this reflex has become more psychological. The feeling that we have options in a situation, a future with prospects, translates into something like the feeling of open space. Our minds thrive on the sense that there is possibility and strategic room to maneuver. Conversely, the sense of psychological enclosure is deeply disturbing to us, often making us overreact. When someone or something encircles us, narrowing our options, besieging us from all sides, we lose control of our emotions and make the kinds of mistakes that render the situation more hopeless. In history's great military sieges, the greater danger almost always comes from the panic and confusion within. Unable to see what is happening beyond the siege, losing contact with the outside world, the defenders also lose their grip on reality. An animal that cannot observe the world around it is doomed. When all you can see are Zulus closing in, you succumb to panic and confusion. The battles of daily life occur not on a map, but in a kind of abstract space defined by people's ability to maneuver, act against you, limit your power, and cut into your time to respond. Give your opponents any room in this abstract or psychological space, and they will exploit it, no matter how powerful you are or how brilliant your strategies. So make them feel surrounded. Shrink their possibilities of action and close off their escape routes. Just as the inhabitants of a city under siege may slowly lose their minds, Your opponents will be maddened by their lack of room to maneuver against you. There are many ways to envelop your opponents, but perhaps the simplest is to put whatever strength or advantage you naturally have to maximum use in a strategy of enclosure. In his struggle to gain control of the chaotic American oil industry in the 1870s, John D. Rockefeller, founder and president of Standard Oil, worked first to gain a monopoly on the railroads, which were then oil's main transport. Next, he moved to gain control over the pipelines that connected the refineries to the railroads. Independent oil producers responded by banding together to fund a pipeline of their own that would run from Pennsylvania to the coast, bypassing the need for railroads and Rockefeller's network of pipelines. Rockefeller tried buying up the land that lay in the path of the project, being built by a company called Tidewater, but his opponents worked around him, building a zigzag pipeline all the way to the sea. Rockefeller was faced with the classic paradigm in war. A motivated enemy was utilizing every gap in his defenses to avoid his control, adjusting and learning how to fight him along the way. His solution was an enveloping maneuver. First, Rockefeller built his own pipeline to the sea, a larger one than Tidewater's. Then he began a campaign to buy up stock in the Tidewater Company, gaining a minority interest in it and working from within to damage its credit and stir dissension. He initiated a price war, undermining interest in the Tidewater pipeline. And he purchased refineries before they could become Tidewater clients. By 1882, his envelopment was complete. Tidewater was forced to work out a deal that gave Standard Oil even more control over the shipping of oil than it had had before this war. Rockefeller's method was to create relentless pressure from as many directions as possible. The result was confusion on the part of the independent oil producers. They could not tell how far his control extended, but it seemed enormous. They still had options at the point when they surrendered, but they had been worn down and made to believe the fight was hopeless. The Tidewater envelopment was made possible by the immense resources at Rockefeller's disposal, but he used these resources not just practically, but psychologically, generating an impression of himself as a relentless foe who would leave no gaps for the enemy to sneak through. He won not only by how much he spent, but by his use of his resources to create psychological pressure. To envelop your enemies, you must use whatever you have in abundance. If you have a large army, use it to create the appearance that your forces are everywhere, an encircling pressure. That is how Toussaint Louverture ended slavery in what today is called Haiti at the end of the 18th century and liberated the island from France. He used his greater numbers to create the feeling among the whites on the island that they were hopelessly engulfed by a hostile force. No minority can withstand such a feeling for long. Remember, the power of envelopment is ultimately psychological. Making the other side feel vulnerable to attack on many sides is as good as enveloping them physically. In the Ismaili Shiite sect during the 11th and 12th centuries AD, a group later known as the Assassins developed a strategy of killing key Islamic leaders who had tried to persecute the sect. Their method was to infiltrate an assassin into the target's inner circle, perhaps even joining his bodyguard. Patient and efficient, the assassins were able, over the years, to instill the fear that they could strike at any time and at any person. No caliph or vizier felt secure. The technique was a masterpiece of economy, for in the end, the assassins actually killed quite a few people. Yet the threat they posed gave the Ismailis great political power. A few well-timed blows to make your enemies feel vulnerable in multiple ways and from multiple directions will do the same thing for you. Often, in fact, less is more here. Too many blows will give you a shape, a personality, something for the other side to respond to and develop a strategy to combat. Instead, seem vaporous. Make your maneuvers impossible to anticipate. Your psychological encirclement will be all the more sinister and complete. The best encirclements are those that prey on the enemy's pre-existing inherent vulnerabilities. Be attentive then to signs of arrogance, rashness, or other psychological weakness. Once Winston Churchill saw the paranoid streak in Adolf Hitler, he worked to create the impression that the Axis might be attacked from anywhere: the Balkans, Italy, Western France. Churchill's resources were meager. He could only hint at these possibilities through deception, but that was enough. A man like Hitler could not bear the thought of being vulnerable from any direction. By 1942, his forces were stretched across vast parts of Europe, and Churchill's ploys made him stretch them even thinner. At one point, a mere feint at the Balkans made him hold back forces from the invasion of Russia, which in the end cost him dearly. Feed the fears of the paranoid, and they will start to imagine attacks you hadn't even thought of. Their overheated brains will do much of the encirclement for you. When the Carthaginian general Hannibal was planning what turned out to be perhaps the most devastating envelopment in history, his victory at the Battle of Cannae in 216 BC, he heard from his spies that one of the opposing Roman generals, Varro, was a hothead, arrogant and contemptuous. Hannibal was outnumbered 2-1, but he made two strategic decisions that turned this around. First, he lured the Romans onto tight terrain, where their greater number would find it hard to maneuver. Second, he weakened the center of his lines, placing his best troops and cavalry at the line's outer ends. Led by the rash Varro, the Romans charged into the center, which gave way. The Romans pushed farther and farther. Then, just as the Zulus would encircle the British within two horns, the outer ends of the Carthaginian line pushed inward, enclosing the Romans in a tight and fatal embrace. The impetuous, violent, and arrogant are particularly easy to lure into the traps of envelopment strategies. Play weak or dumb, and they will charge ahead without stopping to think where they're going. But any emotional weakness on the opponent's part, or any great desire or unrealized wish, can be made an ingredient of encirclement.
And that was the next part of Chapter 15, Envelop the Enemy from the 33 Strategies of War by Robert Greene. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Stuart Varney's My Take.
The president has a new economic strategy. He is righting what he considers the racial wrongs of the past. He went to Milwaukee Wednesday. That's where the construction of two interstate highways back in the 60s separated the black community from the rest of the city. Black leaders have for a long time maintained that those highways deprived their community of opportunity and jobs. Well, Biden has a $3 billion plan to retrofit or remove community-dividing highways all across the country. In Milwaukee, Biden said this: "For communities left behind, we're rebuilding the roads, we're repairing cracks in the sidewalks," end quote. Now, that is a race-based policy designed to attract votes and put right what are considered historic wrongs. Wisconsin is a key swing state, and Milwaukee has a large black population. The president's speech carried a long list of things he's done for the black community: lowering the price of insulin, lowering the black unemployment rate. He knows he's losing ground with people of color, so he's shaping strategy that he hopes will pull in their votes. That's politics in an election year. Will it bring real change? Immediately? No. It takes years, even decades, to revitalize rundown districts. And when it's done, there's no guarantee that growth and jobs will return. How about fixing the deplorable state of public schools, or the justice system broken by radical DAs, or the rampant theft that closes convenience stores, or the violent crime that hurts the minority community the most? The president's strategy is not an economic policy. It is political outreach to a group of valuable voters. Second hour of Varney just getting started.
So what Stuart Varney misses here is that President Biden is now the admitted racist in chief. When he comes out and assumes responsibility to right racial wrongs, then he admits that he is a racist and that he's trying to make up for his own racial insensitivity and his own racial biases. And we add this to the statements that he's made in the past of obvious racial insensitivity and or just flat out hatred, then we can come to the conclusion that President Biden is going to run openly as a racist. Well, I have no intention of voting for a racist, and you shouldn't either. Back in a minute. Thank you. MAGA. So make America great again. What does great mean? What do we mean when we say great again? We mean reliable. That's the way America used to be. When I was growing up, everything in the United States was reliable. You could rely on everything. You could rely on the post office. We used to get mail twice a day. You could rely on the phone system. It was a government monopoly, by the way, that was granted. It was granted by the federal government to AT&T. So AT&T ran the whole phone system. And then we also had reliable news because it was all non-profit. So when Walter Cronkite told you something, you took it to the bank. And we had a reliable judicial system because we didn't have any of this, or I can say it was in its infancy. This idea of government rights was still in its infancy and hadn't infected our judges. And so you knew when you went to court, no matter which way it went, you could rely that it was a good, solid judgment on the part of the judge and good, solid judgment on the part of the jury. So you could rely on it. But now today, with government rights creeping more and more and more into our lives, it's a crapshoot. You may as well go ahead and give it a shot, sue somebody, because if you get the right judge, things will go your way. And if you don't, well, then I guess you could just scrap it and try again some other day. And that's not reliable. That's no good. That's Banana Republic stuff. That's the kind of things that other countries used to do, and we laughed at them for it. And now we are becoming those very banana republics ourselves. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now we pick up where we left off with Inside Delta Force.
It was the heart of the Reagan era, and Honduras, much like Beirut, continued to be a second home for us. It seemed we spent an inordinate amount of time and energy focused on that poor but strategically important nation. And even though we usually operated there in small teams, that didn't mean that was the way we always did things. Like a carpenter planning a job, bigger lumber calls for bigger nails, and bigger nails call for a bigger hammer. And sometimes things would pop up that called for a larger force. Several times a year, the entire bowstring force would be called out for an operation that required a little muscle. A bowstring alert was usually the result of an airplane hijacking, and most of the time that meant a trip to the Eastern Mediterranean. It happened so often that it became something of a summertime sport. We spent so much time in the region that it was seriously suggested we position a squadron in Italy or Cyprus from May until September. We chased a lot of planes around the Middle East, but were never allowed to put our hands on them. We could look, but not touch. Touching was reserved for the rare, odd hijackings in offbeat places, such as Eastern Asia or South America. We deployed on one particular chase, and were pretty close to pulling the trigger when word came down that since the hijacked plane was an Egyptian airliner, the Egyptians would be the ones to take it down. And it just so happened that the Egyptians had a brand new CT force, all trained and ready, courtesy of their good American friends in 1st SFODD. I was sent down by Navy fighter to join up with our Egyptian comrades and go with them as an advisor. But when I arrived in Egypt and linked up with the force, there wasn't a single familiar face still in the unit. This is the example I spoke of earlier. The Egyptian government had concluded that a capable CT force was more of a domestic threat than anything else, and so had scattered to the four winds the soldiers we had trained, and had refilled the outfit with their own political reliables. I got on the radio and called our commander back in Italy to let him know about the situation. He told me he would send a plane, and that I was to quietly slip back to the airfield and get the hell out of there. I caught a ride back to the airbase, met the plane that had been sent for me, and returned to Italy. The Egyptians subsequently made an assault on the plane. The method they chose to get inside the aircraft was to place a 50-pound charge of C4 on the belly of the plane and detonate it. No one has ever figured out why they did that. After all, it's relatively common knowledge that high explosives and airplanes don't mix. The resulting explosion and fire killed more than 60 people. So much for political reliability. After that, we got out of the business of training foreign CT forces. It didn't help anybody and was a waste of our time and resources. Our special gift was hijacking, and we soon got the opportunity to add a beauty to our trophy case. One lazy afternoon, just a few days before we were to relinquish bowstring to A Squadron, we got a call to a hijacking in Honduras. The plane had been taken on the ground and was sitting on the tarmac in Tegucigalpa. And this time, Washington wanted to kick a little ass just to impress everybody in the region. There was only one problem. It was an airplane we didn't have in our playbook, a de Havilland DH-7, a 4-engine turboprop that carried about 50 passengers. So, while the squadron loaded on a C-130 for the flight to Honduras, I headed for Virginia Beach to get my hands on a Dash 7, as they are called, and take its measurements. A small charter outfit based in New England flew the Dash 7s, and they were happy to make one available for me that night. I met the plane at the Virginia Beach airport and spent about 2 hours going over it, making notes, taking measurements, and drawing sketches. This one was going to be a snap. We wouldn't need ladders. All the doors and hatches were at ground level and open to the outside. It was all coach seating, with no partitions dividing the fuselage into separate compartments. You could shoot the entire length of the cabin with a pistol. When I had all the information I needed, I headed south to join my mates in beautiful Honduras. I arrived in Tegucigalpa about 1000 hours the following morning on a flight from Panama. Our plane taxied to the military side of the airport, and when it shut down its engines, I climbed out and set out to find my compatriots. After a short search, I found one of our folks, Guy Harmon, sitting on an upturned bucket, meditating and smoking one of his trademark bad cigars. Guy's call sign is Oso, Spanish for bear, and it suits him perfectly. He has a furry look about him, speaks in a slow, deep growl, and walks with a padding gait. But he has some of the other physical characteristics of the bear as well. He can move with lightning speed when the need arises. He has phenomenal physical strength and unshakable resolve, and is fearless and deadly in a fight. He didn't say anything when we made eye contact, just continued languidly smoking his cigar and watched me as I walked toward him. I didn't call out to him. He was obviously thinking about something, and I didn't want to break his concentration. When I stopped in front of him, he blew a smoke ring at me and said, "Hey, gringo, where'd you come from?" "From going to and fro over the face of the earth and walking back and forth upon it," I answered. Guy smiled. "Well, you've probably found the right place, Lucifer," he said, looking around the area. "If you're looking for the rest of the gang, follow this road on over the rise. You'll find Dan and the team leaders behind that gaggle of maintenance buildings and heavy equipment. They've got a headquarters hooch set up between the bowstring vans. Can't miss it." "What's going on, Guy? What's on your mind?" "Something's not right here. You've got that look on your face." "I'm not sure, Eric, but there's something definitely uncool going on here. You know how at a hijacking site it's usually just us and a few representatives from the local authorities? Yeah? Well, this place is absolutely crawling with people, and they aren't locals. It looks like every secret agent in the American inventory is gathered here. CIA, NSA, DIA, you name them. Why, you can't sling a dead cat by the tail without slapping at least 3 double-gnawed agents upside the head. And this is what's so weird, Eric. It's like they knew this was going to happen. They got here before we did. Hell, they were already set up. Filled up every bit of space in the buildings here. We couldn't get into any of them. There must be 15 high-power radio transmitters set up in those buildings, and phone wires are running all over the place. Bad Bob, our squadron commander, has already had 2 severe set-tos with the chief of station this morning. Seems the guy thinks we work for him. Now get this. The hijacker is some old rube about 60 years old with a couple of boys in their late teens as his sidekicks. Says he doesn't have a political agenda, he just wants some money. And he's done this before. He took a plane, got the ransom, and went to Cuba about 5 years ago. Now he's back. Guy paused and took a thoughtful puff of his cigar before continuing. And there's more. There are 5 or 6 members of a network news crew on the plane, and they're raising hell. The leader of the group gets on the radio at least twice an hour, screaming at the Hondurans that he's an important man, so they should pay the ransom. A couple of other members of the TV crew who weren't on the flight are now running around town trying to raise money for the ransom. I guess they're taking up collections at the Hotel Maya and the other gringo newsy hangouts. Knowing how well that crowd likes one another, they've probably raised 35 or 40 cents already. I'm telling you, Cottonmouth, my call sign, this is a real 3-ring circus. That's about the only thing that was obvious to me. Guy, you got any ideas about what's really going on here? Not yet, he replied as he shoved his cigar back in the corner of his mouth. If I figure anything out, Eric, I'll let you know. Okay, Oso. See you at ringside. Sure, he said, tilting his head to blow an elongated cloud of smoke that looked like the spouting of a whale. I found the boys and dropped my bag in the shade of a small grove of banana trees. As I got my equipment, Dan gathered the other team leaders so I could brief them on the DH-7. After the briefing was over, Dan told me what he knew. The commander is at the embassy duking it out with the chief of station. The ambassador is refereeing the fight. As things stand now, we're supposed to hit the plane tomorrow morning. But it doesn't look good. They've got explosives aboard. About an hour ago, the hijacker radioed the Hondurans for some lime, said his dynamite was leaking and he wanted the lime to cover it with. We passed the word for him to just leave it alone and we'd send somebody out to help. Andre went out there with a load of sawdust. They led him aboard, and sure enough, they had 8 sticks of sweating dynamite rigged in 2 bombs. The old man knew enough about dynamite to know he had a problem on his hands, so he let Andre put each bomb in a box and covered the dynamite with the sawdust. Then the old guy showed Andre how he's got the devices rigged to the main doors, just in case someone was thinking of assaulting the plane. Right now, we have the snipers deployed and are maintaining an emergency assault team. Feeney's team has it now. You relieve him at 1400. But the funny thing about it, Eric, is that no one's negotiating with the hijacker. Oh, they talk to him now and again, sort of half-heartedly, but it's like they don't really want him to give up. Seems like they just want him dead. None of this makes any sense, Dan, I said. We've got a cast of thousands running around here doing who knows what. There's enough radio frequencies flying out of here to smoke a low-flying bird. The old man and the chief of station are having a turf battle in the ambassador's office. Hell, I've been to a beheading in Saudi Arabia, 6 county fairs, and followed a syrup mill all over North Georgia, and I've never seen anything like this. What gives? Dan was an internal person, and he seldom said more than was necessary. But he took in everything, and he had an amazing ability to see through subterfuge and determine what lay at the heart of a matter. Dan was a long-range human polygraph. Eric, I believe the whole damn thing is a CIA operation gone wrong. Probably a fundraising mission for the Contras. But something happened, and the Hondurans didn't pay off quick enough, and no one counted on that news crew being on board. Before they knew what was happening, the cat was out of the bag, and the last thing the agency can afford is for the guy to give up and talk. So, to protect their secret asses, the hijackers have to be killed, and we're the ones who get to do it. And that's why the place is covered with those bastards. They've got to make sure it doesn't get any worse than it already is. I mulled that over for a bit. It made sense. There wasn't another good reason for the overblown attention the agency was focusing on this affair. Congress had recently put its foot down about funding the Contras, and rumors had been wafting about that the agency was conducting some freelance work of its own to raise money for their pet Nicaraguans. So yes, this made sense. It was just a short step from running drugs to hijacking planes, but I was willing to bet the guy who dreamed this one up was sweating blood right now. Dan, that's a pretty shitty state of affairs, I said. They get their ass in a crack, and we get to be their hitmen to cover it up. What kind of rat bastards operate that way? Thoroughly rotten ones, mi amigo, he said with a laugh. Rotten to the center of their shriveled-up souls. But it's all just a theory, you know. I believe that's what's going on, but there will never be the slightest scrap of evidence to indicate what's really true. I joined the rest of my mates and got into my assault gear. The rest of the day oozed by in the thick tropical heat. The guys were unnaturally quiet. There was very little of the normal joking and storytelling. Mostly they seemed lost in their own thoughts, as if they were trying to transport themselves to a different time and place. I know that's what I was trying to do. To break the fugue, every once in a while I'd walk over to the Honduran radio shack and listen to the latest talk from the airplane. It was always the same thing. The leader of the news group was asking about the progress of his friends who were trying to raise the ransom money. He had a whiny, condescending voice, and I could tell he had already managed to piss off the Honduran authorities. Ugly American. He wasn't helping his cause. Just before dark, the squadron commander called us together. He had a surprise. Guys, we're not going to make the hit. The Hondurans are going to do it. We'll provide sniper support for the assault. Eric, you and Andre will go with the Hondurans and hold their hands. The assault will take place at 0500 hours in the morning. Everybody looked at us. I looked at Andre and lifted my eyebrows. Andre looked at the toes of his boots and shrugged. What are our instructions, Jefe? Are we leaders or advisors? I asked. You know the Hondurans have never done a plane before. I don't think they've even practiced on a civilian aircraft. If they go in on their own, it will probably be a bloodbath. And don't forget about those dripping boxes of dynamite on board. You'll be leading the Hondurans. You're the assault leader, Eric. Andre, you're the 2IC, second in command. I'm counting on you two to keep it from becoming a bloodbath. We're all counting on you. The Hondurans are expecting you. When you've got your gear together and you're ready to leave, come and see me. I want to speak with you both in private. This was getting worse and worse. The Hondurans weren't bad, but they weren't good either. They didn't have much experience, and there wasn't much we could give them in the time we had left. Andre and I conferred before we reported back to Bad Bob. We were both worried about that dynamite. Andre said that while he was aboard, one of the passengers was able to tell him that the hijackers attached the bombs to the main doors only when something was going on that made them nervous. The rest of the time, the bombs stayed on the front row of seats under the direct control of the old man. That was good information. At least the hijackers had the good sense not to keep active booby traps hooked up all the time. When you do that, you run the very real risk of accidentally setting them off yourself. And if they were hooking the devices to only the two main doors, maybe we could still get in without setting off those damn bombs. We went over to join the boss. Larry Friedman also came over so we could coordinate with the snipers. Andre and I felt we had a plan and explored it with our guys. Larry, do y'all have a good clear shot at the hijacker when he's on the radio? Yeah, Eric. He has to stand in the middle of the cockpit to handle the mic, and we have a converging shot on him from each cockpit side window. The pilot and co-pilot are seated well below the angle of fire, so they're safe. It would be a righteous shot. That's what I was hoping to hear. I turned to Bob. We can get into the plane by way of the emergency exit hatches located on each side about midway down the fuselage. The hatches are spring-loaded. They pop to the outside. That gives us 2 breach points, one on either side, that can't be blocked or rigged with the explosive devices they have on board. If we can place the assault teams into position at those hatches just as daylight breaks, and then place a radio call to the plane, the snipers will be able to take out at least one of the hijackers. At the crack of the shots, we can be inside immediately, and more than likely, we'll roll right over the other 2 before they're alert and have any idea what has happened. Andre will lead one assault team, and I'll lead the other. That way, the Hondurans don't have to think about what they're doing. They just go where we go and do what we do, and they're pretty good at that. We'll give you a good shot, said Larry. You want me to count it down, or do you want to? I'll count it down, Larry. That way, if something screws up, I'll be able to stop the count if I need to. I'm not sure how easy it's going to go with the Hondurans once we get them out there and next to the plane. They may get excited and hard to control, or they may get hesitant. I don't expect any trouble with them. They're a good bunch of boys, but we need to be prepared for anything. Larry nodded in agreement, and then Bob spoke. The priority here, guys, is clearing the plane and releasing the hostages unharmed. If you don't like the feel of it when you get out there, back off and we'll wait, or we'll try something else. Some people around here may think the attack time is set in stone, but I'm not one of them. You do what you think is best. I don't want you 2 taking any unnecessary chances. Andre piped up with a grin on his face. What chances are you talking about, Jefe? It's only an airplane with 3 terrorists inside, armed with submachine guns and bombs. You'll know immediately whether we've won or not. How's that, Andre? Bob asked. Simple. If the plane doesn't blow up, we've won. Bob laughed and said, Then my advice to you 2 is, don't blow up the friggin' plane. I want to see you both tomorrow, telling me what a magnificent job you did and trying to talk me into giving you a week off so you can recover from your ordeal. You can count on it, Bob, I said, as we wrapped up our meeting. The atmosphere felt light and back to normal. We'd get the job done in the morning, and then everybody could go home. Whatever was going on here would be sorted out before the Earth completed another revolution on its axis. It might be strange, but it was all part of the great play of life, and I knew we had our part to play during this act, just as the hijackers did. We picked up some extra radio batteries, performed a radio check, and had a last-second coordination conference with Larry. Then we hitched a lift in the pickup for the ride to the other side of the taxiway where the Honduran Cobra Force was set up. Andre and I had worked with these guys before, so it was like old home day when we joined the group. The Hondurans were the best of all the Central American militaries. The Army had never been the repressive force in Honduras that it had been in the other Central American countries. For the campesinos, a tour in the Army was viewed as a leg up in society, so the enlistees usually did their best. The Cobras didn't have a lot of confidence in their abilities yet, but they were tough, and they wanted to do well. The plan we outlined was a simple one. Once we talked them through it, we drew a diagram of the plane on the hangar floor with chalk and started rehearsals. It wasn't hard to understand. When the snipers fired, we would assault the plane. Andre would lead his team in through the left emergency exit and clear aft. At the same time, my boys and I would come in through the right exit and clear forward. When we were satisfied that everyone knew what he was supposed to do, we tested their weapons. We filled a 55-gallon drum half full with sand, tilted it 45 degrees, and had everyone test fire his weapon into the drum's neck. Then we made a radio check and put the guys down to sleep. We'd get them up at 0400, and the assault would follow quickly. I didn't want them to have a lot of time to think about things, just enough to clear the sleep from their minds, make a last-minute equipment check, get a big drink of water, and move into position. Andre and I spread our poncho liners on the ground in front of the hangar and got some rest. I fell asleep listening to the slow, rhythmic footsteps of the Honduran guard as he paced back and forth on the tarmac nearby. I came wide awake at 0300 hours. This is the world's quiet time. The night animals have finished their endeavors, and the day animals are resting silently. Nothing moves at that time of the morning. Even the insects are quiet. It's one of my favorite times, and to be awake at that hour always gives me a faintly self-satisfied feeling, like I'm in on a secret of some sort. I lay snug under my poncho liner for a few more minutes, hands linked under my head, just thinking and looking at the night sky. From the vantage point of my warm, comfortable spot on Mother Earth, I could see off into infinite space and the eternity of time. In just a few hours, I thought, some of us are going to make that leap into eternity, and I will be one of the instruments of that voyage. I may also be one of the travelers. It's going to happen sooner or later. But if today is my day, I'm going to have a cup of coffee first. I rolled over and dug in my rucksack for the makings of a big canteen cup of MRE, meal ready to eat, coffee. Andre stirred and turned over to look at me with alert eyes. He didn't say anything. He just reached into an outer pocket of his rucksack and tossed me an MRE bag filled with coffee, cocoa, cream, and sugar packets and heat tabs. Then he lay there watching me as I filled the canteen cup with water and set it on the tiny stove that held the blue flames of the burning heat tabs. When breakfast was in motion, Andre rose and we broke out our shaving kits and readied ourselves for the day. I made a thick, strong brew of coffee and cocoa, one with plenty of sugar and powdered creamer. This would be our meal. When it was at the optimum temperature, just before the boiling point, Andre held out his canteen cup and I poured him half of the thick, aromatic liquid. He inhaled the sweet smell of the cup and lifted it to his lips. Just before he took a sip, he stopped short and said, "You know, Eric, I really don't want to kill that old man and those boys. I'll do it, but I don't want to." I knew how he felt. That was the thought that had awakened me, and the same one that had worked at my mind while I slept. Hijackers are terrorists. Our job was to kill terrorists. But this hijacking had been remarkably short on terror. When the old man took the plane in the first place, he apologized for the inconvenience he was causing everyone. No one had been harmed at any step along the way. He had voluntarily released the women and children and the sick and elderly. He had started with a full plane of about 50 passengers, but was now down to fewer than 30 hostages. And he had never asked for an outrageous ransom, just $500,000 and a continued flight to Cuba. But that was funny in itself, because Cuba always turned over air pirates these days, and he had to know that. A lot of this just didn't make sense. I didn't know if I completely bought Dan's theory that the agency was behind it all, but something was definitely unkosher at Toncontin Airport in the fair city of Tegucigalpa, Honduras. While we sipped our coffee and chewed on our thoughts, I turned on my radio, plugged in the earpiece, and made a commo check with the sniper TOC. Nothing to report. It had been quiet on the plane all night, and no movement had been spotted inside. That made sense. The hijackers and the hostages should be just about exhausted by now. I checked my watch. I had finished my coffee and was rolling up my poncho liner when the radio spoke into my ear. "Cottonmouth, can you see the plane from your location?" The voice was animated. "No, not from here," I responded. "Well, get to where you can. The hostages are escaping. A bunch of them have jumped out of R2, the emergency exit on the right side of the plane. Otto's team is policing them up right now. Hang on a second. I've got more stuff coming in." Andre had also heard the report, and he jumped up and slung his MP5 around his neck. I grabbed mine, and we sprinted to the end of the next hangar, where we could get a view of the plane. In the dim illumination of the airfield lights, we could see a gaggle of people being herded off the field and into a ditch by two black-clad figures. The radio barked again. "Otto reports that about a dozen hostages were able to get out before the hijackers regained control. The old rooster hijacker is on the radio with the Hondurans right now. Your orders are to stand by. The assault is off. I say again, the assault is off for the time being. Acknowledge." "Roger, TOC," I answered. "The assault is off until I receive orders otherwise." Andre, go rouse the Cobras and stand by in emergency assault mode. Who knows what's liable to happen next? I'm going to link up with Otto and see if I can make sense of this. Continue to monitor the command frequency, but you and I will talk on Channel 4. I'll call you when I know more. Okay, hermano. I'll get the boys and bring them to the back of this hangar. We'll be closer to the plane, but still out of sight when daylight comes. I'll let you know when we're in position. Andre trotted back to get the Cobras ready, and I headed in the opposite direction to see what the escapees had to say for themselves. I found the crowd in the ditch where I had seen them disappear. Rick Downing was giving first aid to one of them, while the rest were huddled about Otto's feet like frightened chicks clustered around a mother hen. Otto was on the radio giving a report, so I went to see if Rick needed any help with the casualty. The man had been given a chem light, and he was holding it near his uplifted face so Rick could see what he was doing. The poor guy had a broken nose, that much was certain, but other than a sore but unbroken wrist and a good case of road rash on his face, he seemed to be okay. None of the other escapees were injured, but they were all thirsty as hell and guzzled the canteens we gave them. Otto and I conferred when he finished his report to the TOC. Eric, the guy with the busted nose is the chief of the news group that was on the plane. You know, the guy who's been making all the noise. Here's what we've been able to piece together so far. I think it's pretty accurate. Just before midnight, the old rooster put the two boys in charge of the passengers and lay down to get some sleep. Once he was sawing logs, the two young dickheads got into the onboard liquor and had a little private party. When they fell asleep, our newsman here, who was leaning against the R2 hatch, just reached up and pulled the handle. Little did he know the hatch was spring-loaded. So when she popped open and fell outboard, he went out with it, face first into the tarmac. As soon as he and the hatch disappeared, everyone close by started leaping out. If they'd been quiet about it, I'll bet everybody could have gotten out. But they started yelling and making such a racket that the old rooster woke up and put an end to the great escape. He motioned to the passengers, who were still passing the canteens around and acting pretty perky. Nothing like escaping death to spice up life. If you'll take these guys up to the hangars, Larry will send a truck around to pick them up. Then Rick and me can get back into our position and see how this thing plays out. I understand the assault is on hold, he said, glancing in the direction of the plane. That's the way it stands right now, but who knows what could happen next, I replied. Yeah, well, I hope it stays on hold, Bubba, Otto said grimly, his brow furrowed under the camouflage paint on his face. There's no need to kill that old man. Otto feels it too, I thought, as I got the former hostages to their feet and started moving them to the hangars. When the old man saw that half of his hostages had jumped ship, he got on the radio and told the Honduran authorities he was through dealing with them and demanded to speak with the airline station manager. Once he had the airline representative on the radio, he laid out his new demands: fuel for the plane, food for himself, his accomplices, and the crew, and a cash payment of $250,000. If all that wasn't forthcoming by 10 o'clock, he said he would release the remaining passengers and crew members and set the airplane on fire. He suggested to the station manager that his company contact their insurer and see what those sensible people had to say about that idea. Fork over a measly $250,000 or buy a new airplane. He got his way. The money was quickly delivered, along with air charts and approach plates for Cuba. The airplane's crew thought so much of the old man that they actually volunteered to make the flight themselves. Otto, Andre, and I clustered on our little knoll near the taxiway and watched as the plane cranked up and took to the air. Within a few minutes, it was just a shiny speck in the distance, and then it was gone. I never heard anything about the old rooster or his two young apprentices again. I like to think that he invested his money wisely and was able to enjoy his remaining years in peace and quiet. The newsman ran around for a while trying to interest someone in his story, but even his own network ignored him. My mates and I returned home, pleased with the outcome of the affair. Sometimes it isn't the job you do that gives you the most satisfaction. It's the one you didn't have to do.
And that was the next part of Inside Delta Force from Eric Haney, Command Sergeant Major, retired. Back in a minute. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you that you are not neutral and that the government has no rights.